Today I have the very special honor of presenting to you the largest, most comprehensive, most scientific noise gate shootout on the internet to date. And good luck to anyone who wants to try to beat me in the future. It's not going to be easy. We've got just about every noise gate ever made in the history of guitar. Pretty much. I would say that's an exaggeration, but it's true. And we'll get into that. This is all made possible by a fan of the channel, David Howard, who saw my first noise gate shootout and contacted me and said, I've got so many more noise gates that you haven't tested, so how about doing a part 2? And I said yes. He happens to be local, so he was able to get me the noise gates for filming, for testing. So thanks to David, this wouldn't have happened without him. In my first shootout, I had the 3 that I own, which includes the ISP Decimator I, the Behringer NR300, and Amuzik noise gate, which are similar to many other small Chinese noise gates. I was also helped out by Lee Cheney of the Metal Prognosis, who remotely in Australia used my test files and measured a bunch more of his own. In my first shootout, we had 7 noise gates, and this time we're up to 22, which represents almost everything on the market, save a couple of boutique ones and a few variations on other pedals that we do have tested. I'm using the same test method as before, but I've made a new test file and more properly calibrated some of the levels, so it's as good and accurate of a test as I can do. Now, this is not a laboratory and I'm not a professional test engineer, but I have taken great care to make these results as accurate as possible and double and triple record all these pedals, try out different settings, make sure that I'm as fair to each pedal and show it in the best possible light, because I really don't have a horse in this race. I just want to see accurately how all these pedals perform and which one perhaps is best. All of the data, the recordings, and the test file will be available if you want to run your own tests, if you want to double check my results. That will all be made public, so feel free to contribute to this. If you have a few of the pedals that are not on this list, perhaps you'd like to test them and add to the spreadsheet for everyone else. My test method is fairly simple. I have a loud clip of white noise and a soft clip of white noise. The soft part is to be gated and the loud part is to be let through. The soft part is there also so we can determine if there's some noise floor. I use a clip of white noise so that I can very accurately pinpoint when the clip has ended and how long of a release time the gate has, because the main thing I'm measuring here is the release time. There are a few other factors, but that's the main one I'm concerned with. How fast is the noise gate? To make sure we're all on the same page with terminology, the attack time is how long it takes for the noise gate to open up from being silent to being open and allowing the sound to pass through. The release time is how fast the gate will close again. So when you mute your guitar, how long does it take for the noise gate to fully clamp down and cut your signal out? I'm also measuring the noise floor so we can see if these gates fully close or if they partially close and how loud the signal is when it is closed. I've also collected a number of other pieces of data for comparison, like whether or not the pedal can do the 4-cable method, whether or not it has buffered or true bypass, how much the pedals cost, when they were released, if they're in production. All of that can be found in the spreadsheet, but I'll be covering most of that in this video. Another very important feature on a noise gate is the effects loop, or the 4-cable method. It will usually show up as send return extra set of inputs on the pedal. This works much like an effects loop on an amp, which also probably confuse some people, so hopefully this will clear it up if you don't understand how this works. The way this works is your guitar will go into the input, and that will be the cleanest possible signal with the most dynamic range, so the gate can really accurately respond to your playing and your muting. Then anything noisy, which will be all your distortion, whether it's from pedals or your amp, will go in the effects loop. So in that send return loop, you will send it out to your pedals, to your distortion, and you can also send it from there to the amp, and then your output, if you're using it with your amp, will go to the return of the effects loop. So it will go from the output of your noise gate directly to the power amp. If that's confusing, let's think of a very simple scenario where I've got my noise gate, and a distortion pedal, and that'll go straight into my computer for me to do other stuff with it, like speakers later. I would plug my guitar into the input. The send from the effects loop of the noise gate would go to the input of the distortion pedal. The output of the distortion pedal would go to the return, and then the output of the noise gate would go to my computer, which would have anything else on it like an amplifier or speaker cabinets. We could also use it in the effects loop of a high gain amplifier. And again, plug the guitar into the input. The send of the noise gate would go to the input of the amp. The return from the noise gate would go to the send of the amplifier. And then the output of the noise gate would go to the return of the amplifier. The way I measure the attack and the release time is fairly simple. Because I have a clean start-stop with the noise clip, I can simply select that area in the recording, and I can get a reading in milliseconds of how long the attack is and how long the release time is. Most of these have a very short, if not non-existent attack time, which is what you want. You want the gate to open up the very second you play anything over the threshold. We don't want a long attack because that will cause a delay in our signal. However, a short attack time won't really hurt us, and anything under 10 milliseconds shouldn't be noticeable. However, I'd still like it as small as possible when recording so that we're not losing anything in the signal or introducing any delays. The release time likewise should be as short as possible, say 10 milliseconds or under, but I would say anything under 60 or 70 milliseconds is perfectly usable and fast enough for really any genre out there. There are some that go under that, and I would say around 100 to 120 milliseconds is usable, but is getting on the slow side, and anything much above, say, 120 milliseconds for me, I think is pretty much too slow. I just want to jump in here and say that the release time is to be taken with a slight grain of salt because there's no fully, easy empirical way to measure the release. As we look at these waveforms, we can see all of these gates function slightly different in how they gate. Some of them have a nice fade out. Some of them have this very angular looking wave, which looks to me like maybe phase cancellation. Do I measure the entire fade out as the entire release time, or do I pick a point and say, well, it's basically quiet enough here, so effectively it's this many milliseconds? I've tried to be as fair and accurate as I can be with these and double and triple check my numbers, and frankly, there's just no way to get numbers that are 100% accurate because at some point it's a little bit arbitrary where I make the distinction or where I set another function to cut off. The release time is to give you an idea of the speed, but also I have an audio test here so we can hear the release because some of them have a nice short release time, but they have an audible pop or they have some other issue like a high noise floor. So the way I've done this audio test, they're all running through the exact same amp sim. This is a clean DI track going into the amp sim, so it's a gated DI, which means there's going to be noise from the amp sim. There's going to be a noise floor on all of them, but if the noise floor is higher on some of them, that means the gate has a little bit higher noise floor. So there's more to it than just the release times, just to put that out there, because I know some people will say and look at a bunch of numbers and just go for the lowest numbers. Some of these actually look better on paper in terms of the numbers I put together than they actually sound or than they function in real life. So just because maybe the numbers don't look bad doesn't mean that it's a great gate. Or sometimes the numbers may not be as impressive, but it sounds really good and it works really well. And it's better in a lot of other ways than other gates. So that's just my little disclaimer. Onto the audio test. So here's my lovely winner circle of my favorite of these gates and the ones that I would recommend. So let's listen to some audio of each of these and see how they compare in terms of sound. These are all the gates out of these that I can really give a strong recommendation to. There isn't anything cheaper that performs as well. So while there are some cheaper options that perform okay, none of them perform up to what I would consider the bar for a noise gate, especially in a metal context. For softer genres, you might be able to get away with less, but for metal, these are the ones that you're really going to want. And these are the gates that are going to provide you with the speed, the clarity, the features, and the quality that you're going to need. It's also worth saying that none of these perform better than software. So the cheap option for the modern musician, if you're recording on a computer, is to use a plugin. Plugins perform better than any noise gate can because they have a lot more features, and there's just so many plugins out there, and there's so many free noise gates. Almost every guitar amp sim comes with a noise gate built in, which are usually pretty good quality, about on par with most of these, though you can always go deeper into that if you want to. All these pedals are capable of the 4-cable method, which is pretty important to me. I think any pedal that doesn't do that is not really good enough. Current US prices in January of 2024, from lowest to highest, we've got the Sentry at $120, the Rev Gate at $170, the Boss NS1X at $200, the KMA Pylon at $220, the Zool Plus at 225, and the ISP Decimator II G-String at 235. Once again, the overall winner is the Sentry, I think, for features, tweakability, performance, and price. The value of it is just a lot cheaper than any of these, and arguably better than all of them in some ways. In terms of the smoothest sound, I think the ISP, because it's a downward expander, is a really nice, smooth kind of sound. The Decimator, if you've ever played one, is a little different feeling gate than some of these that are more traditional noise gates. The Pylon is also really smooth and has that one knob design. I wonder if the Pylon is also a downward expander. I'm not sure, but it is similar in feel to the Decimator, though it is the noisiest in terms of how much it lets through. So it's very smooth in its release, but it doesn't fully cut off your sound, which some people may like. I kind of don't, but I still think the Pylon sounds really good and is overall a top pick for me because it looks so cool. And it also includes a boost in it, so I like that. It's easy to dial in because it's just one knob. The Boss NS1X is also a fantastic pedal, and it feels really nice. It's got good tweakability. It's very fast, and it sounds smooth. Some of these vary a little bit in terms of the dynamic range, as in how soft of a note can I play and still have the gate perform the way I want it to, so cut off at the right time, because you can set the threshold higher to a point where you can play softer notes without it gating, but then sometimes it'll take a long time to clamp down. If you play a muted chug or something, you want it to stop. You have to set the threshold a little higher than you'd like. Don't like that. So the sort of dynamic range of the pedals is a factor. And again, the ISP does really well on this. The Sentry does, because it's got this exponential knee function in the software. And I am using my custom tone print on this, but that is free software that comes with the pedal. And I show you my settings in this video, so you can copy it if you want. This one performs similarly to the Decimator in how smooth it is. Maybe not quite as nice because it's a little different technology, but that's a minor gripe in terms of how it fades out. But it is also faster than the Decimator. So once again, the Sentry is a top pick in terms of smoothness, in terms of speed, and how it performs. The range on it, the dynamic range, is good. The Boss actually had the slowest release time out of any of these at 55 milliseconds, but it feels snappier to me, maybe because it cuts off quicker when it does cut off than the Decimator, which I recorded had a slightly faster release time of 45 milliseconds, but in terms of how it feels, because of the way they cut off, I would say the NS1X feels snappier to me, even if it's technically not. And I think that has to do with the fade out being really fast on that when it cuts out. It does so in a nice way that's not too choppy. The Rev Gate and the Zool both have that kind of choppiness that you can encounter in a lot of traditional gates, and this can be remedied with the hold and the release time, which they both have. So if you like the Zool and you like the sound of that, I think the Rev Gate does the same thing, maybe better, but pretty much the same, and it's a lot cheaper. I also kind of like the look of the Rev better. I just think it's a really nice looking pedal. So that's good as far as a sort of more traditional noise gate, but once again, it's more expensive than the Sentry. It does look cooler. The Pylon definitely wins for looks here. It looks super cool. I like that the LED comes on when it's gated and changes color. Really nice. Quality on the Pylon is fantastic, and it does have the extra boost function. So that's a great pedal all around, but it is kind of noisier in terms of it didn't cut out my signal completely. So it had a good noise floor performance in my test, but I was noticing here that it just doesn't completely gate out the signal. So, and the Decimator II, if you like the feel of the Decimator, any of those, they're great. The problem with this one is that it's quite expensive, and again, it doesn't feel as snappy as some of these. So it has a pretty fast release time in my measurements. Having a smoother release makes it feel a little slower in terms of how fast it cuts off because it doesn't just immediately cut off. So the release on this sounds better because it's smoother, but it sounds slower. Whereas things like the Rev Gate and the Zool feel snappier, but also are more choppy, and they can have that chattery, sputtery sound in there. The Sentry can do that too, but I've got it tweaked in my tone print with the exponential knee. You can also adjust the hold time in the software, but I have this one set as low as possible, and it's just the exponential knee is giving it that softer fade out. The NS1X also has a really nice sounding smooth fade out compared to some of these, but still sounds fast. So all these are great picks, and it's hard to rank them, but for those who want me to, the Sentry is just hard to beat in terms of the price and the performance, the features, the tweakability of it. It's kind of the complete package. However, it's arguably the least good looking of any of these. Looks wise, the Pylon just looks really cool, and it does have some extra features like the boost, which you can also control with an external foot switch. Cheaper than the Decimator II for a pedal that I think is similar, if not better. So if you are looking at the Decimator II G-String, you might consider the Pylon because I think it's kind of similar under the hood in terms of how it gates, and it has the boost, and it looks cooler. So that's a good thing. Decimator II looks cool if you don't get fingerprints on it, but man, is this thing a fingerprint magnet. And it's the most expensive. Arguably, it might be the best sounding because of how it cuts out, but it may not be to everyone's taste because it doesn't feel as snappy as some of these. So you may or may not like that, but it is a great performing pedal, and it's quite expensive. Between the Rev and the Zool, which I feel like are similar, not just in terms of looks, but in terms of sound, I prefer the Rev because it's cheaper and I think it looks better. So if you're considering one of these, I would give the win to the Rev. And the NS1X is, I think, smoother than either the Zool or the Rev, and similarly fast. It's got some more features than the others. It looks cool as long as you like the shininess of everything. It's got this cool LED strip. I think it looks kind of futuristic. The NS1X is a solid choice. In terms of performance all around, for my taste, it's kind of a toss-up between the Sentry and the NS1X, but the Sentry is a lot cheaper, and it does have more tweakability in the software. So I will kind of give the edge to that, but the NS1X just feels like all-around high-quality pedal, and the way it gates and everything, some of the details might feel a little nicer than the Sentry in some ways, but it's kind of a toss-up. The Rev Gate is a more traditional style of gate, which feels kind of fast, but also has the slight disadvantage of being a little choppier and not sounding quite as smooth as the others. So, but it looks really nice. It performs well, and the price at $170, I think, is a pretty good price. So that's my thoughts on all of these. And like my first video, my all-around recommendation is still the TC Electronics Sentry. Now, why that one is so good is because it's essentially a plugin in pedal form. It's software. And if you've used a noise gate plugin, you've probably seen that they have a whole lot of options and a whole lot of flexibility, and pretty much any stock gate can usually go super fast, and you can control the attack and the release time to the millisecond. All of these options are kind of inferior to that. As for the very low budget category, there's two that I would consider, and I own both of them already, which are the Behringer NR300, which is a clone of the Boss NS2. I'm going to stop you right there, bud, and just say the NR300 is not a perfect clone of the NS2. The NS2 is much quieter. It has pretty much the same release time, but it has a more aggressive fade out, so it sounds a lot better. It sounds a lot quieter. The release is not nearly as noticeable. And the NR300, I've got them both here. I can't get them to match up perfectly. The NR300 has a much higher noise floor. It's kind of a noisy pedal. It is a plastic pedal. And considering that you can pick up the NS2 used for 60 or 70 bucks pretty easy on Reverb or at your local shop, I would just get a used NS2, or better yet, see if you can find a used Decimator 1 or 2. Either of those are going to be better option. And even though it costs twice as much, it's not a huge difference in price in the real world. So you're better off saving up a little bit if money is an issue, or the really cheap mini pedals that are, again, 20 to 30 bucks on Amazon. There's a bunch of brands that do them. They're slow, but they're less noisy than the NR300. They don't have the 4-cable method, but they're otherwise better. And stock, they're pretty slow, except for the Donner seem to be a little faster, if you can get that one. But you can also mod them. I did a whole video on that pedal. Long story short, a blogger in Japan found that it's basically the same circuit as the ISP Decimator I with a fast and slow mode, but in the fast mode, it's the same as the Decimator, except for some reason, and I don't know why, the release time was twice as long, or more than twice as long. So I went on a quest, detailed in that video, of trying stuff out and doing some research to get that release time faster, and I was able to do it, but it's not the easiest pedal mod. So it is doable. If you're confident in your soldering skills, you can go watch that video. You can buy a $30 pedal, turn it into a clone of the Decimator, which is a solid choice. Again, not the fastest, but it's a good pedal, and it works for most things. And for $30, you can't go wrong. As for the used market, what I found that I would recommend are the Decimator 1 and 2 and the Decimate Mini. If you can find any of those for under 100, those are all pretty solid bets. A lot of these others are new or small production runs, and you can't really find them on the used market yet, but maybe in the future you can pay attention and pick up one of those used. So now for the worst of, and what I would not recommend or what to avoid. The Boss NF1. This is their oldest gate going back to 1979. It's not terrible in most categories, but it doesn't perform as well as more modern ones, and it doesn't have the 4-cable method. It was also a bit noisy, and it was kind of hard to dial in the threshold right where I wanted it. The MXR, Smart Gate, and Noise Clamp. These are different pedals. They perform similarly. They're priced very similarly. The Smart Gate is better in some ways in terms of features, though the Noise Clamp actually performs slightly better in terms of release time and noise floor. Neither of them, I think, are really great. There was some issues with triggering it properly, and for the price, I didn't think they were amazing. Not terrible gates, but given the price of them new, I would say you can do better. Because again, for $120, you can go get the Sentry. So just do that. The TC Electronics Iron Curtain. This is a cool looking pedal. I dig the communist imagery. It's fun, especially for a product that we're selling in a free market country. And that is $50. $50 US you can buy this Soviet propaganda for. And it has a release time of 265 milliseconds. So that's why it's a big nope. Just stay away from that one. Sorry. The Electro-Harmonic Silencer. This one has everything going for it except for the attack time, which is really long at 100 milliseconds. That's just, I don't know why this pedal is the only one with a very long attack time. I found that in my first test with Lee's, and I wondered if maybe it was a fluke or something, but I had one here. I tested it a few times. It just didn't work out well, and the threshold on it was very sensitive. I don't have a good measure for how well some of these gate in terms of threshold. I don't really know exactly how to measure that well. So some of it you'll have to take my word for as the feel of the gate. But this one, I didn't like it. It's really hard to get in the sweet spot. The attack time is really bad. And it's $80 new, which would be a good price if it performed well, but it doesn't. So stay away from that one. The Rocktron Hush. This was a pedal from 2010, apparently, but maybe it goes back further. I had a hard time pinning a date on this one. It's pretty noisy. The second highest noise floor. So that's a reason to stay away from it. The release time at 70 milliseconds is pretty decent, but the noise floor really hurt this one. However, you can get them super cheap on the used market, and it's kind of a cool looking pedal, but doesn't really have the modern amenities, doesn't have the 4-cable method. The DoD FX30B. This is also another old one going back to 1985. This had just a really bad release time of 150 milliseconds and a bad attack time of 24 milliseconds. I could forgive the release time if the attack time was better, but with an attack time like that, that's going to be a pass from me. Likewise, the cheap Chinese mini pedal is good if you do the mod, but the mod's kind of hard. And if you don't know how to solder, you're not confident in that, you're not used to doing anything with surface mount soldering, and you don't want to do that, I would also stay away from those, because with a release time of 300 milliseconds, they're unusable. If you don't mod them, they're basically unusable, depending on who you are. But for me, I would say that's a nope. However, if you're willing to do the mod, it can be a great pedal. So I'm torn on that one. Know yourself and know what you're getting into. The only one in my best of category that doesn't have the 4-cable method is the Decimator II. And that's mainly in there because you can buy it used for under $100. And I would recommend getting that one used if you're going to get it. If you're going to get anything from ISP, probably the Decimator II used or the Decimator II G-String used. But the G-String version used still was going for around 160. The regular Decimator was going for 90 when I saw it. So at $90, I say it's good. But the release time, 75 milliseconds on the Decimator II non-G-String version. That's certainly within spec. It's not the highest performing, but that's, I would say, quite a fast and good release time. So that wraps it up, and I hope you are now super informed on noise gates and ready to go out and buy the best ones using this data if you're so inclined and you need a noise gate. But I hope this is useful to anyone shopping for a noise gate. I hope this is satisfying to your curiosity if you want to know the specs on your favorite or least favorite gate and why you like something or don't like something. Maybe this will answer some of your questions. And if you have more gates that aren't on this list and you want to test them, you can find the files below. You can run the tests. I will provide instructions and all that. And you can share your results in the comments of this video or over on my Discord. The link for that's in the description. So as always, smash like, subscribe, and have a good day. And what else? I don't know. I think that's it. Thanks for watching. Oh, and thanks again to David for making this all possible. So that's it. I'm done. I'm done with this video. Thank you. Have a good one.